All right, good evening, and we are indeed live. And here again, it's another special night.
Yep.
And we're back again. You and I, Brother Barkley, we're
Yep.
back for the second night,
Yeah.
but on a different topic. I mean, I'm still reflecting on last evening's
Hmm.
conversation. I was talking to my godmother in Savannah today. She was on last night. She joined us, and she said that last evening was the most clarity that
Yeah.
she had received about the COVID virus since
Right.
all of this began. And
Right.
so I really felt good. That really validated why we're doing this project, why we do what we do.
Right. Yep. It really put a good framework around what this last year and a half has really been all about. And I've been working up close and personal with COVID, working for a health plan and working on the vaccination sites that rolled out in the Valley. And even I still learned a whole lot about the virus and heard it in a way that I hadn't heard it presented before that provided even.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah. So, but I'm excited about tonight. So this evening we're back for what I'm calling Black Progress 2.0. We had the conversation, what, 2 weeks ago, maybe 2 or
Two,
three
three
weeks
weeks ago.
ago. We
Hmm.
talked about Black Progress, and the conversation was so good, and we were really getting into it. And so we decided that we needed to come back with part 2. And so here we are. And I'm very excited. I think I heard you mention backstage that you have some more questions to really get our excellent panel this evening to get them thinking and sharing where we are in as individuals in this lived Black experience and where we are as a whole. And so, with that being said, it's yours.
Awesome. And I'll invite all of the lovely panelists to join me back on stage. And before we get started, just for our viewers, not to boast on y'all too much, but I'm just going to go through some quick introductions of who you folks are based off of what I have. So we've got Dr. Natasha Howard with us, an assistant professor at Morehouse College. Her special areas of specialization include representations of the intersection of race, gender, sexuality, and respectability in media, with a particular focus on Black women, women's studies, and hip hop culture. She's a co-editor of the book Black Women in Popular Culture: The Conversation Continues, and has been published in both academic and popular outlets on the topic pertaining to representation of Black women in the media and in pop culture. Next, we have Miss Quiana Dickerson, who currently serves as the political director of the Arizona Democratic Party. She's the immediate past chair of the Arizona African American Caucus and has worked in Arizona politics for 8 years, supporting candidates, engaging the community, and building coalitions. It's good to have you here with us, Quiana. And then lastly, we've got Dr. Hart with us. Dr. Ann Hart is the former Deputy Associate Superintendent for the Arizona Department of Education. She's a visionary, inspirational speaker, writer, strategic engagement advocate who inspires and leads by the principle of having faith for the journey. Her purpose-driven passion is to educate others regarding various school and community issues by raising educational and community awareness through her robust civic involvement and contributions. Dr. Howard, Dr. Hart, Ms. Dickerson, it is wonderful to see you tonight. Awesome, awesome. Well, last time for you, Dr. Howard, and you, Dr. Hart, we had the opportunity to talk about progress kind of in a broad bird's eye view perspective, right? A little bit of abstraction, our thoughts on progress as a whole. Today, I want to narrow it down a little bit more to some more specific issues and just get your unabashed thoughts on them.
Okay.
Now, I know I tend to ask questions that are a little multi-layered and broad. And for our audience who's seen me do quite a few of these now, I make a point not to send the questions out ahead of time which is different than maybe some other panel discussions that if you watch a lot of those, because this is very much a conversation. Just a conversation amongst folks who are in our communities, who've been at it for a while. And so that doesn't change tonight. I really just want to get your perspectives on how to address these certain issues in your mind, what's working, what's not working, either realistically, or if you had a magic wand, how you would address these issues. If you were a dictator for a month, how you would address these issues. So you can get as realistic or unrealistic as your heart desires. Yeah, good stuff. It's going to be great. But first, just to kind of segue between, last month's conversation and this month, I wanted to start still on that kind of framework of abstraction. Now, having been involved in a few community initiatives myself now, in a few different communities, it obviously requires a lot of working with the powers that be. Usually, you're usually working with city council. If you're trying to change the education system, you might be working with the school board. You might be working with the Parent Teachers Association, what have you. You're working with systems, and a lot of times you're working with systems that maybe in the past haven't had your best interest in mind as a Black individual, or maybe even has actively contributed towards harm for your community, right? And so I've been noticing this interesting interplay where you're trying to compromise, you're trying to work with these systems that historically haven't always had your best interests in mind. And the thing that I've been really concerned about in my head is, okay, how do you bring about progress and fight for progress when working with these systems, but avoid it becoming tokenized, if that makes sense? How do you avoid your efforts becoming just another tokenized effort that system can then check off? How do you evaluate whether or not you're headed down that path or you're still on the right track in your mind? What are maybe some of the red flags?
Is that okay? I'll start.
All right.
It's risky. Number one, especially when you're, in an organization and you're bound by a right to work state like we are here in Arizona. You're in today, you could be out today if you say and do the wrong thing. So obviously you have to use politics, intuition, and integrity. And you have to know how to swim with the sharks. I start off by saying that first, because the people who sit around you are not always people that you can trust. And some of the people that sit closest to you are the ones who want your job. And so what happens, in my opinion, is that when you're at the table, because normally you have some role to play where your input is required, whether it's respected or documented or utilized, it is required. So when you get at that table, I think too oftentimes we just are happy just to be at the table. You have to make yourself known at the table, especially for African-American women, in my opinion, because three things happen. You'll say something that no one has ever thought of saying before, very creative, ingenious plan, idea, or something that needs to be executed, and it goes on deaf ears. It rolls around the table. Someone who doesn't look like you says the same thing, and it gets applause, and they throw confetti and bring out coffee. And other times, unfortunately, Brother Barkley, our African-American women seem to always, men want to silence us. If you go back to the women's suffrage, and prior to that, even with the March on Washington and Martin Luther King's speech in 1968, it was only one woman that was allowed to speak at the podium that day. And in churches, we're the ones who have been known traditionally to do most of the work, and then the men speak. And including the civil rights movement with Rosa Parks. Rosa Parks was strategically utilized to be the face for that movement. When she wanted to speak about it, they wouldn't let her speak, and she wanted to share. So I say, when you get to that table, it's risky because you have to decide that you're not going to just be at the table, but you want to be a part of the conversation. And how many times can both of you, Dr. Howard and Quiana, say that you have happened and you get pushback, or it's crickets, or nobody gives you that obligatory nod that says, yes, we respect and appreciate, because there should be some kind of body language or something that says we welcome that. And so you asked, Brother Barkley, how do we make that more than just a seat at the table? You just have to be your input has to be precise. It has to be consistent. It has to be something that's fundamentally important. And you want to make sure, I do, as in most cases, make sure that whatever I'm offering to the table, that I get immediate buy-in at the conversation. So you don't have to wait
Don't leave
until
it
after the
there.
meeting's up. Yeah.
Yeah.
Does everyone see? Does we have anybody agree? Do you think you should see anything different? So you have to be measured and pointed and precise.
Thanks for that, Dr. Hart. I appreciate that. And that's good advice, not letting it get pinned up to a board, because once it's pinned up, it's too easy. As people of color, people who belong to disenfranchised population, especially folks whose intersections are multiple identities who are disenfranchised, like Black women, it's all too easy for folks in power to pin it and then forget it and just let it get buried beneath everything else. Quiana, that same question to you. You worked in a big system, working with the Democratic Party. That's about as big of a system as you can get. And so I'm sure you've had an experience on both ends. How do you operate in a way that's effective and avoid becoming tokenized?
Number one, I go into each of these experiences and each of these tables with an understanding that I deserve to be there. So I've worked just as hard, if not harder, than many of the people that are sitting at that table. There is, it seems to be amongst our, as Dr. Lewis would say, our European counterparts, that mediocrity allows them to fail forward, whereas we have to work forward and work double, triply as hard. We all know that adage and where that comes from. But once you get to the table and you know that you deserve to be at the table, you have to decide what role that you're going to play, or at least I do. Quite often we are used as Black women as a shield because of our unapologetic way of expressing ourselves. And when things are not right, we will speak up. And we know when we speak up for everybody that is disenfranchised. We don't just speak up for ourselves, whether we intend to or not. When we raise our voice, everyone else, other communities rise. So we have to understand that, and that's a responsibility. But we are also not there to be the fix-it for whomever has torn apart. They have to own their stuff just like we have to own ours. The other thing is saying no. No is a powerful, complete sentence. And I would love for the African-American community to really start saying no as a complete sentence. You can throw an exclamation point after that if you want to.
There's no comma, no comma.
No comma, just no.
Okay.
We're not going to participate. We're not going to do those things. We are not going to be used in that manner. We are not going to do it, and stand by that. I think that's how we stop ourselves from being a token. But the other piece of that is understanding that most of the systems that we are involved in were never created for us, and they're still not there for us. They have just become aware that we are valuable players, and a conversation for another day as to where they are actually aware or if they're performatively aware, but that's a whole nother conversation. But in the meantime, if we are there and we are at the table, we have to take responsibility for ourselves and know that we're worthy, stand up for ourselves, because when we do, we stand up for everyone.
I love it. I love that. Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's hard to get over, when the system that you're living in has so many signs and signals that tell you that you don't deserve what you've earned. It's hard when you get to those positions not to have some level of imposter syndrome. It's a real conscious effort, I found, not to buy into that, and to, like you started with, remind myself that I've earned the right to be here. We've earned the right to be here. That can be difficult. That can be difficult. Dr. Howard, you work in higher ed, and academia is infamously restrictive, at least in my opinion, towards women, especially women of color, in higher education, achieving roles of power, getting published on a consistent basis. How have you been able to operate in a way where you can actually speak your voice and your truth without it being taken, watered down, and distilled into something the institution would prefer as opposed to yourself?
I would say the ways that I've done that personally is I often, in positions, with past positions where I felt like that was happening, I always looked for outside organizations. I looked for outside places to publish, outside ways of getting funding, because when it became really clear, I've been in situations where, I proposed an idea, like Dr. Hart said, like, you propose an idea, nobody says anything, then somebody else comes around with the same idea you had, and all of a sudden it's great. And so for me, when in any situation where that's happened, it's like knowing, I know my competency, I know my worth, I know I can, I'm a hard worker, and I know my ideas are valid. And so I just I've always taken the approach that if my work's not appreciated here, well, I'm going to go and still do some of my work, but it's just going to be, I'll find somebody outside of here. And you'll still see, like at the institution, you can still see what I am doing, that it's possible, that it's possible to still get things done. And I found that like that actually tends to, in the past, it's really sort of stood out to other people. I would say other women in particular, like when I know I had a grant at my former school that I received outside of the college, and it was such a big deal. And because no one else in the department had ever applied for something such as that. And then after I did it, there was another woman, a Caucasian woman, but she was another woman in the department that she went for it, because it was like, oh, I didn't know that this was something that would be even viable. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I think that really is just sort of the idea of, like what's been said, being precise and being like clear on what your focus is and what it is that you want to put your efforts towards. And just sort of, even when you hear those no's, or you hear people who may not necessarily have a buy-in, if it really matters to you, still finding a way outside. Because I find that when people see that you're still doing that thing, you're still going in that direction with that idea that they really weren't that interested in, all of a sudden when you get that attention, it's like, oh yeah, we're our pride and joy. So,
right. When it comes time to do a grant report on what you've done in the last year, then all of a sudden it's like, yeah, look at this awesome thing that we've done as a team. I can totally feel that. Dr. Hart, I'm going to ask you to hold me to account, because before the end of tonight's session, you touched on something that I've been racking around my head around gender roles. And since we've got a panel of three really distinguished women, I want to circle back to that at some point, but I want to at least knock out a couple more questions. I just want to make sure I throw that out there to hold myself to account. I want to get your folks' perspective on that. But let's get into the nitty gritty of some actual specific issues. So I'm just going to go over some specific approaches to progress that are popular, some issues that the Black community at large is trying to address, and try to get your perspective on how you think, in your mind, if you had that magic wand, if you were the president, if you were the almighty dictator of America and had all the funding in the world, how you feel we should work towards addressing these things. And the first one that I want to bring up has to do with investing in Black business. So one common approach that I've seen a lot when you talk about Black progress, especially during COVID, when the economy was also so raked over, is let's invest in Black businesses. Let's invest in Black businesses, shop Black owned businesses, invest in Black stock. But as most of us know, most Black people and most people in general don't own businesses. Mm-hmm. So talk to me about, one, do you feel that this approach is helpful? And if so, how? Or what is it trying to accomplish? And if not, what do you think are some alternative ways we could be approaching that financial support of the Black community? Like I said, super easy, light question.
So I like the Black Wall Street concept. Greenwood, Oklahoma. And I think that when you buy Black, you build better Black when you work collaboratively. Because what happens, we get isolated in our particular ventures. And just for instance, I'm gonna give you an example. I typically spend a lot of time on Etsy.com, which primarily focus in on Black vendors, because I like ethnic and I want to buy Black. And that's a collaborative website that sponsors primarily Black vendors. I mean, there were 9 Blacks on there as well, I think, but they're minority in the minority category, so to speak. And I think that's what keeps us from being envious and intimidating and backstabbing with one another. And I'm just going to keep it real. We have that tendency to do that to each other and our Black communities and our minds, because our mentality shifts to the haves and the have-nots. As opposed to if I do better, you do better. And that means if I do better, you do better, we do better. So I like that, Wall Street was something that needs to be replicated and reproduced and re-engineered again. And I hope that our millenniums that are coming up in back of us do that. The only thing that I would say, and in the tragedy that followed that enterprise, you have to know when you do things that there's always going to be someone out there that's going to take a pot shot, and whether that's minor, major, or dangerous, or results in death. You have to know the psychology of human nature and human beings. You have to build in an infrastructure of safety and security like you do anything else. So I would like to see communities. For instance, if we were to use Maricopa County or in Arizona, see our communities utilize safe spaces to build a collaborative network where we can all be in a collaborative, unified organization where everyone in that collaboration is a vendor that sells products that can be used that are helpful, et cetera, and something that can be looked forward to on Saturdays, for instance, or the first Wednesday of every month. But collectively, we look for anybody that comes in there has the opportunity to make money. When you try to venture out on yourself, and you have to be very, 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 you have to have a marketing plan that's going to target people that want to shop. Like, as you know, what websites do, when I go in, I look at this, and this, those are the pop-ups that come because they understand my shopping style. So I think that we should learn how to come together as a group of people, as Black people. I mean, that's what I'm gonna just leave it there. But I believe in the Black Wall Street concept. Okay. Yeah, and I think if we did that, I think it would really go somewhere. I do.
Right. And it's that's probably going to end up being a theme throughout a few of these questions. So please, at some point, if you want to keep going there, because that's a great point, right? It's one thing to start a business and have a successful Black-owned business, but then what is that business in connection with the actual Black community after you've started making profit, right? Dr. Howard, Quiana, your thoughts? Is this an effective model? What improvements could this model use, if any, or are there alternatives that you think might kind of serve that purpose better than investing in Black business specifically?
I think we have to open our view of what Black business is. I think there's a larger service component that we don't think of. It's not only just material goods, it's also Black therapists, it's also Black consultants, it's also Black marketing individuals. We have to expand our spaces where we believe that Black people occupy businesses. And I think for so long, we have thought that when someone Black has a business, they're selling us something. They're selling us some earrings. They're selling us a product. But we have, the women on this call right here. I know Dr. Hart is an accomplished consultant, educational consultant, and that's a business. So we need to really open up and start looking at the needs that we have for our community beyond just things that we can trade. It's also the level of expertise that we have that we need to apply a value to, specifically around areas that are not common in our community. I'm thinking about Black mental health and the amount of Black therapists, which I strongly encourage everyone to seek one out, find one, get one. And there's plenty of, especially in this pandemic telespace, all over the country. Right? Black accountants. Like, I personally have a Black accountant that I sought out, a Black accountant. I seek out spaces where I can find expertise that come from our people, right? And so I think if we open up that concept that Dr. Hart was talking about Black Wall Street, I think is spot on. But I also think the benefit of what happened in Greenwood is that they weren't one type of business. Like, you could take and wrap around the entire community with what was there in that community. And we don't have that geographically, specifically where we are in Arizona. We don't have a Black center, so to speak, where we all are. But I think the social media spaces that we all occupy give us that. I'm able to kind of curate my Instagram so that I'm seeking out and liking and following Black businesses. So that is, to your point, what comes up for me, because that is the only thing that I have allowed in that space.
Wow, what a good point. Yeah, you know, the idea of we don't have a physical centralized location, but we could create this with the wonders of technology, right? There, we could still utilize these businesses and services to have a network that is localized and easily accessible. And then it comes to that follow-up. That's a great point. Dr. Howard, please.
And going off of that idea, I feel like that specific industries, I've seen different apps and things such as I think like the Eat Okra app is basically for Black-owned restaurant, you know, food services. And I think that will really be helpful going along with this idea of collaboration, because both Dr. Hart and Quiana, they both like picked off of the things that I was thinking of, just idea of people being able to work together and collaboratively, but then also the fact that there are so many varieties of different types of businesses. Like, so if I want to, I know for a while, because I primarily just like the two panelists, I can like, that's what my Instagram feed is. I'm following like Black artists. I'm following like apparel, Black designers, this, that, and the other. And so that's what I primarily see. But it's like I personally go out trying to seek specific Black businesses for patronizing things. My therapist is Black, gratefully, but I also used to live in the DMV, so it was very easy to find a Black therapist.
Right.
But I think if there was just to be some ways that you could have more, especially in the virtual realm, just be able to have like this variety of places just in one sort of hub, and it's like, go here and you can see all these different listings. I think that would be helpful, and I think that it does help to create circulating dollars in our community. But yeah, I think that it is valid. I mean, you see other groups that they keep their money within their community. I think that it just helps raise awareness of, and it helps our community. Yeah, I'm all about patronizing Black-owned businesses anytime I can.
Yeah, and you know, to Dr. Hart's point, you know, kind of going off what you just said, Dr. Howard, it's really good to patronize these businesses, to give them money and to build them up. But then it's also, you know, making sure that those business owners feel a connection and responsibility to their Black community, right? Because it's all too easy to get success and Morgan Freeman it, where all of a sudden you're on TV and you're like, I don't even see race anymore, and you know, like, yeah, you know, we don't live by any of them anymore. So you know, of course, making sure that they still feel tethered to that community when you give them that success is a big deal. Also, shout out to the both of you who've mentioned having Black therapists. Just it's something personal and close to my heart. If you need mental health support, which I think we all could use, thanks for being willing to share that, because that's always just something good to broadcast. And I might hit y'all out because I've been looking for a Black therapist myself. Because it's difficult to talk to a white therapist about why you're so scared of police and what impact that has on you when you leave the house. So it can be difficult. Sticking with you, Dr. Howard, and on this same theme of finances, right, and the economy of the Black community, pull it out of my pocket. Obviously, one of the discussions that comes up a lot in talking about the economic well-being of the Black community is reparations. Reparations. Now, there's 1,000 different ideas on what that could look like, and even whether that should happen. For you, Dr. Howard, and then for you, Dr. Hart and Quiana next, if you're comfortable, share with me what are your thoughts on reparations when that does come up? Is that something that you feel is viable, should be done? What does that look like, if you have any idea of what that looks like? I just kind of throw that out there.
Yeah. So I'm pro reparations. I'll put that out there. And I think that it's definitely something that can be viable because they've done it before. They've done it with other groups of people. So I don't understand when people come up like, oh, well, we can't, why should we have to pay for, our ancestors past? I'm like, because you did it before. So it's very, for me, I'm just like, yes, it should be owed. I think that, particularly when you think about systemic inequality, and just like how these systems, like, we automatically are at a lower place because of all of these because of where we started, essentially. And like, so for all the successful Black people that we know of, we definitely know of many that are still like living in poverty, struggling. And I think that definitely is something that should be considered. And I've read about some of the different models, different suggestions in terms of what would be best. I think the starting point is just to say, hey, like, this is something we're going to do, and then coming up with a plan from there. Selfishly, I think about the money piece. Selfishly, I think about the college loan forgiveness, for those, to be honest. But I know that doesn't apply for everybody. So I think I think that the first part is having the ball rolling, like this is an actual viable thing that can actually take place, because of the fact, again, that there is a historical precedent with other groups who have been oppressed, and not even for as long as us, and that have received it. I think it definitely is something that's realistic.
Thank you, Dr. Howard, for sharing that perspective. And and it's interesting that you bring up some of those other models or things that would be useful to you, like student loan forgiveness, right? Or at least some support in that realm, because I think when people hear reparations, so often they think you're just going to get kind of a check at your house. And, how is that viable? How is that helpful? And to some people, that is their idea of what reparations should be. So continuing down that path, Dr. Hart, Quiana, Ms. Dickerson, what are your thoughts on reparations?
So, there's a couple of things, but I want to applaud President Biden for Build Back Better, because that theme encompasses a lot to me. And so reparations to me, for instance, Rosewood, Florida, Groveland, and Cincinnati, Philadelphia, all these places that Black folks were under attack, discriminated, murdered, killed, and kicked off their land involuntarily. Put some numbers to that. Let's do the math. I want the real estate. I want the worth of it then, and what it has evolved to over the last 400 years. I want hospitals, education, mental health, of the challenges that people suffer through there. There's going to be do the math, attach a formula, whatever you have to do. Give the land back to those citizens of Rosewood. Give it back to those citizens of Cincinnati and those cities and towns. Give it back. And we talk about most recent reparations is in the move in May of 1982 in Philadelphia, when they burned down 2 city blocks and killed 11 children and other adults. And these people lost everything. And they prefabbed and built those houses back up, and they fell apart right after they moved into them. Give them back solid real estate. Give them back an opportunity to build their banks and hospitals, and name every street in those towns and cities after someone in their family or their neighborhood. Because it's hard to compute who was there. Really, let's be honest. We know that we have, generations of people who are living, but give back the land. Just like the land that was taken from the family in California. Look at the money they lost over those years. A whole beach, where people could have put $500,000 cottages and rentables on that property. So my reparation looks like give it back in real estate, give it back in economics, give it back in everything that it takes, what they could have developed and what they could have evolved to today in having their own cities and towns.
I will say I completely agree with both Dr. Howard and Dr. Hart. I can also add to that, from a political standpoint, give us back our representation. Right after Reconstruction, we had, I don't know how many, I can't think off the top of my head, the numbers of African Americans that went to Congress as elected officials. Give us back our representation.
Good point. Good point.
We are now in a space where we have one Black senator, because I'm not counting the other one. We have one.
Fair.
He doesn't count, especially after, yeah. But the one that's there, if we had representation in those spaces, in addition to the land, in addition to the educational benefits, in addition to tax breaks, as I've heard many people say, but if we actually had a voice, a representative voice in Congress, we could do a lot with that to move us forward. We're not going to fix what happened in the past, but moving us forward, we know we will be able to accomplish tremendous gains for not only our community. And I continue to say this because people will watch this and say, Black folks only want these things for Black people. There is no such thing as that. When we do things for us, the entire country benefits every single time. So I want people to acknowledge the fact that the fights that we fought with civil rights, with women's suffrage, with everything, equality in healthcare, everywhere, everyone benefits from the work that we put in to change. So give us back our representation.
Yeah, and there are so many things that are done systemically through the gerrymandering process, and most recently, especially in Arizona, through voter restriction laws that primarily impact people of color, especially Black people in lower income neighborhoods, the removal of ballot drop-off boxes, restrictions on times you can vote, the removal of polling places that directly impact us, that seem to be such a direct and overt attempt to restrict us from having representation. The rules seem to constantly be changing, and so that's huge. That's something that when people think about voting rights and equity in voting, they don't generally equate that to reparations. I like that you brought that up as part of what we're owed, just like everyone else, is fair representation. Shifting gears here just a bit, I want to talk a little bit about criminal justice and policing. This was obviously one of in the last 2 to 3 years, especially since George Floyd's murder, but also before that in 2014 and 2015, in places like Baltimore, Black Lives Matter started taking root. You saw a lot of protests with young folks in the streets. That's continued on for the most part. We still have huge systemic issues with policing. Obviously, we're still killed at disproportionate rates. Our sentencing tends to be a lot harsher. One of the things that brings that to light to me specifically is now that marijuana is recreationally legal in Arizona, there are still a whole lot of Black people who are in prison or who have criminal records for marijuana charges, while you've got a whole lot of our Anglo brothers and sisters opening dispensaries and seeing a whole lot of success for that. So there's obviously still a lot of discrepancies in the criminal justice system, but policing is kind of the big hot topic when you talk about criminal justice. My question for you is, give me your thoughts on, especially in these last few years since the protests have really ramped back up, has the state of policing changed at all? Are there any positive things that have happened in the last few years? And if not, what would you specifically like to see to address the disparity in the way that we're policed?
So I will start off by saying, yes, community policing has changed and it's evolved into a monster. And I think we always took it for granted. When I think about where I am in my space and place, and I mean where I've evolved from the time I've been born in the cities I've lived in, from Philadelphia to Washington, D.C. here, and seeing the evolution of how different community policing looks in those cities, especially coming from Philadelphia. I mean, I have seen the most egregious acts of excessive force and brutality ever, and being in Philadelphia, where men were detained and for no reason, and while they were detained, they were asked to strip down naked and lined up against city streets, up against the wall, to dehumanize, and to witness these things, and for a police officer to feel like this is the best way they have control. It's what we see that is coming out in the light with these recent killings from city to city, state to state, and most recently the huge one with George Floyd, it's always existed. The onion has been peeled back. The sheet has been lifted. I remember, I'm going to use an example, growing up in the city. I think what I would like to see evolve, because we have so many, we don't all agree on what community policing should look like and what we all feel comfortable with. We just don't. And that's because the people's experiences have been different. So your experience is going to tout that different kind of explanation. I think we should go back to community precincts, not precincts, huge precincts, but where you have quadrants of officers and police detail that work in particular communities where the community knows you. And so therefore, when something would happen in a different section of Philadelphia, for instance, we knew that Officer Barnes or Officer Jones or Johnson or whoever were the ones that we could go to for concerns and comfort, and or either to complain or or for redress, because it was the same group there all the time. They walked the beat, they bicycled the beat, they were in their patrol cars. But see, now we have people changing. You know, they change commanders. They're there for 3 months and they move them out north. Then they move them out south. Then they bring them back. And then they bring in a new guard. They bring in the old guard. Then people get promoted. So consistency is important, and relationships is important. And I don't know why that's so difficult, because we are, you know, everybody, we are afraid. We're scared for good reasons of the police. Nobody wants to have an encounter with the police and end up dead, but there's no one who can, where we feel that there's accountability. There's a pipeline of accountability. If something happens, we know that we can track those steps. But so I'm saying in short, maybe the long version, but the short version is we need to develop smaller precincts of accountability and not change these officers out every other month and every other week and every other year. Let them grow within that community. And I know there's some cities that have those buy programs where you buy a house for $1 and you live in the community. That may work to a certain point, but it could be dangerous for that officer. But I just feel there should be continuity and consistency, where accountability can be more solid when they are housed and precinct in the communities over a longer period of time, as opposed to a shorter period of time, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes total sense. Total sense.
I have 2 points. One, I would like to see a change in the language that we use around it. There are certain communities that are protected while our communities are policed. And that we need to change how we view who is quote unquote worthy of protection. We all are here for protection. That is what we are supposed to call them for, to be protected, not to be policed. And I think we need to understand the difference there, and then internalize that difference. The second thing is that those people that are given the task of protecting and serving, we need to spend a greater amount of effort in analyzing those individuals and what they bring to that job, right? How many of the other spaces where we have been employed, when they interview us for not only our professionalism, but all that comes in our history. If you've ever applied for a government job, you're basically signing over your life and 30 pages of application. And it does not appear to me that any of these officers are being vetted on that level. Then the level of training that they're provided, and it's not continuous. Any other profession, you have to maintain a certain level of professional development, because they understand you have not reached the pinnacle when you get the job. But what is the type of professional development that these individuals have to continue to get afterwards? And is it standing up to the times that we're living in? Are they getting trained on biases? Are they being trained on cultural differences, diversity, inclusion? Are they being trained on mental health? Are they being trained on what's going on in our classrooms and with our students and with our young people? The young people today, if you've been on the beat for several years and you're close to retirement, you've been through how many different generations of teenagers? They are not all the same. And now we have young people that are being killed because they operate differently than maybe a teenager did 20 years ago. So we need not just training, we need understanding of cultural evolution, right? And we need to change the thought process around who is being protected and who is being policed.
Thank you for that. And over to you, Dr. Howard, your thoughts on the state of policing and what's needed. If you had that magic wand.
I agree. I agree with both of them. Definitely. I think that the training piece and making sure that those who are in those roles, you can't fear the community you're supposed to be protecting, or quote unquote fear. It just doesn't work that way. So there definitely needs to be, bias training. There needs to be, I think really in particularly looking at mental health and looking at people's track records, more in-depth analysis of people who are applying to try and become police officers, and then still having a consistent review of them, and there actually being some sort of penalization. There's so many of these officers that we've seen who have murdered people. You look at their track record and it's oh, they had this many incidents in their past that were brought to light. And it's so it took them having to kill somebody that you finally decide, finally do something. And with that being said, my biggest thing is qualified immunity. That's got to just go. I think there needs to be, when you have that there, people there's no fear. It's you feel invincible. You can do what you want. That needs to go.
Yeah.
So that's it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You know what's interesting to me, and this gets at something that Dr. Hart started to touch on a little earlier. When I think about policing, one of the things that I don't think gets brought up as much is, I think sometimes there's a misconception that a lot of these deaths happen during patrols and stops. And kind of to Quiana's point, right, it's about being protected, not policed. A lot of times police forces can be used as revenue sources. And so it's easier to get that revenue from populations that aren't going to fight back, right? They're not going to sue you because they don't have that kind of power. They don't have that kind of money. So they go to a poor community. But the other thing is changing the way we as communities view the police and when we call the police, right? And why we're calling the police. Because you look at something like George Floyd's death over the counterfeit $20 bill. That's how that started, right? You had a counterfeit $20 bill. Police were called out and it escalated, right? I keep asking myself, did police really, really need to be called for that, right? Was that the most appropriate resource for that, or are there other resources in these cases that could be called? When you look at Elijah McClain, whose case is finally being looked at a little bit more closely in Colorado, he was just walking in the neighborhood, right? And someone's suspicious. I'm going to call the police. And I feel like if we could change the perception on when it's appropriate to engage a force that is primarily trained to detain or use physical force, right? If we could change how often people are engaging that service versus other services like mental health crisis services, or just minding your own business, right? And not calling the police for everything because you're scared, or just talking to your neighbor, right? If they're being loud, as opposed to calling the police to go tell them to be quiet. I feel like that could reduce a lot of interactions that we have to have with the police in the first place, right? Why are they being called out? But that goes back to Dr. Hart's point of community, right? If you don't live in a community you feel tethered to, it's so much easier to just be like, I don't feel like dealing with the guy across the street or the person who's passed out drunk. I'm not going to deal with it. I'm just going to call police to come deal with it, right? Because I don't have to stay here and worry about what happens next. Whereas if we were able to build these communities where we felt tethered to each other, maybe we could just go over there and have a conversation, right? And be like, hey, this is a counterfeit bill, man. It's just a thought. Going back to that community thing, I think that a lot of solutions lay in there. Before I forget, I want to go back to the issue of gender, because it's been in front of my head. So I was reading an article actually today about trans deaths of trans women And over the 2020, they listed as the most deadly year for trans women. Not surprisingly, the large majority of trans women that were murdered were Black, not just people of color, but were Black. As a matter of fact, of the 71 homicides that happened in 2019, in 2020, 46 of them were Black trans women. But also, I just know, working in the field of domestic violence and sexual assault in the past, Black women are also much more likely to not only experience those at higher rates, but to experience them at worse rates, higher hospital bills as a result of domestic violence assaults, and things of that nature. I want to ask the question to you three women specifically. What roles do you feel gender norms have played in your ability to fight for progress and operate, your ability to be taken seriously? You know, I would just love to hear your folks' perspective on what is that like being a Black woman who's got these goals, who's got things they want to see change. And to me, it seems like there's a lot of barriers. How do you operate with that? And what's contributing to all of that in the first place? Because a lot of the domestic violence cases against Black women are coming from Black men. A lot of the homicides of Black trans women are coming from Black men. What are your thoughts when you think about that? It's just something that's been in my head all day.
Woo, that's a whole nother 2 hours. That's a big one right there. I'm trying to figure out which direction to come from. Starting with the Black trans women, I want to just take a minute there. That how we choose to present ourselves to the world seems to be so offensive to other people. Whether you are a Black trans woman, whether you are a Black woman, whether you identify as, however you identify, whether it is you're the shade of melanin that you reside in, whether it be how you walk, our presence as Black women seems to offend so many people all the time. If we allowed ourselves to shrink or minimize, reduce, or live in fear and not present how we choose to present, we would all stay in the house and we wouldn't leave ever. So that's not an option for us because, like you said, we got things to do. We got ambition. We have things to do, world to change, children to raise, families, businesses, all of those things. The other piece to that is our society as a whole has put women in a space, and women as a whole are fighting their way out of that space. Black women essentially are kicking our way out of that space. We are some of the highest educated, as my panelists right here can attest to, the highest educated individuals, not male, not female, not Black, anybody in the United States. I am quite privileged to say that I know as many PhDs as I know. But we are kicking our way into spaces that were not meant for us. To very earlier on question, it was never thought that Black women would occupy the spaces that the three Black women, the three of us share. It was never intended that we be in those spaces. So showing up is one of the first things that I find a responsibility for myself to have to do, because I have 2 sons and a daughter, and I need them to see that not only is that space occupiable, but that we can fill the space with everything that we have, no matter what it is that we choose to do. And specifically for young Black girls to be able to see that every single day is so significantly important for us going forward and how we move forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's easy from an outsider's perspective, especially when you're so accustomed to seeing people who look like you in positions of power, to be like, it's not a big deal. It's not a big deal if this character is black versus white but it is, right? Because when you're kids, you learn by what is presented in front of you. And if you don't see a whole lot of examples of Black women in power, it's hard to then imagine yourself in those roles. But the other thing to that same point is there tends to be such a double standard, though, for women in those roles, right? I even think, and Dr. Howard, you might be able to speak on this more. I'm a hip hop fan, right? And I remember a couple of years ago, Cardi B had said in an interview, she was like, when I was a stripper, I used to rob guys. I used to get them drunk and they pass out and I'd rob them. And there was this big uproar.
I remember,
huge uproar. But then I remember being like, I don't know, I listened to like the Wu-Tang Clan and they're like, I'm going to shoot you in the mouth. And
all the time.
Right? That's not, they win awards. They got a TV show, right? But, when this woman had come out and said something that was kind of against preconceived notions of femininity, there was a lot of blowback to that. What's your experience with that and your perspective on that?
But just speaking on the hip hop, a lot of that, there's so many double standards with this. Like, the female rappers being accused of all you guys talk about is sex and getting money. And it's like, have you listened to yourselves? Exactly. I was like, men have been doing that consistently, and and the whole sex sells and all that theme, it sells. And so when women take that upon, they're getting criticized for basically doing the same thing that these male artists have been doing, following that same formula. And it makes me think of what, like Quiana said, it's like there's just something just so like, how dare you step up into this role and be successful and like get all of this attention and not walk in the light of how we feel like a woman should be walking or how she should be holding herself. So yeah, with hip hop, I could like go on with that. I feel like so many people want every female rapper to be Lauryn Hill, and I'm just like, that's not.
Well.
I was like, that's not gonna happen. So, but I think just in general, I think that the double standard, I always think about the idea of respectability. I think that they're just for so long this idea, just women in general, that you're supposed to act this certain way, and there are certain aspects of femininity you are supposed to hold, and like your role in the house and with family and this, that, and the other. And I think that you see today, just like that's just not for all women. That's not something that's happening, and I feel like it sometimes still blows my mind. It's 2021 and some of those conversations are still happening, still having to sort of justify the idea of wanting to talk about sex or dressing sexy, how you dress, how you present yourself, which pronouns you use. Even that becomes a conversation with some people. So many of these things, it's like, how dare you step outside of this position or this role that we envision for you. And it definitely, and then when you see women who particularly like take these roles of leadership and are, or even when I think about it, one of the topics that I'm really interested in is just women who become single mothers by choice. So the idea of, I want to start a family, I don't have a partner, but I'm going to still do this. It's like people, like I've just seen some reactions with people getting so super offended, like, how can you do this? And it's like, wanting to start a family. Like that's ultimately what it's about. But it's just like them actually willingly wanting to take control of their life, make decisions for their future. It's like it drives people crazy. It's like they cannot fathom, like, as a woman, that you could be able to do that. And I don't know. It's a fascinating but frustrating thing, I think I've noticed.
Yeah. And, there's a switch that I always, I've read about that kind of happens too. And maybe Dr. Hart, but the rest of the panel can speak to this too. There's like this, for young Black women, there's this hypersexualization, and then it switches to this kind of like mammitization once you reach like 30, where it's like no longer are you allowed to express these things anymore. You're kind of, you need to be the at home raising the kids, not working, right? Singing.
Exactly.
Right,
And if you
it's
do, you're
switches.
like criticized. Yeah,
Right.
it's like, yeah, definitely. Like you express sexuality, it's like, oh, you're hypersexualized. And then it's like,
Right.
oh, you hit this certain age, you need to be wearing a moo,
Yeah.
cover up. Don't talk
Right.
about that.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting. Dr. Hart, you had mentioned it briefly a little earlier, when even within our own community, within civil rights movements, within institutions like church that are so important to a large percentage of the Black community, even there, where you would hope to feel safe and have some equality, it does seem to be that there are these really strict and restrictive gender norms that still exist. I just want to hear your thoughts on that. What contributes to that, and what is that like operating against, I'm assuming, against that?
To no surprise to me, maybe to others, it's a part of the historical American tapestry. So, remember, I mean, I know on this platform we're all from a different era in terms of when we were born. But traditionally, you start back with the Black family, even during our enslavement period of time. I don't like to call it slavery, but we were enslaved. Women had their roles, men had their roles, but men always, their role was to always protect and provide for the woman and the children, the household, the head of the household. And as we merged out of that into our institutions of church, the Black church, that was our salvation on Sunday, to be free of labor, to be able to socialize, sing, and part with one another. And the leader of our Methodist and our Baptist churches were men. Those were our leaders. And we would come home, and young girls were learning how to cook. Women were preparing meals, whether it was for the family or the church community or the neighborhood that day, even our typical barbecues and picnics. So when you think about conceptually, and it's not unfair to feel that a man is the provider. This is what's instilled in young boys. Be a man. Some of them were taught not to cry because it was a sign of weakness. Don't wear these kind of clothes because it presents you in this kind of fashion. And so you learn to be strong and tough, to play ball, to grow up, get married, earn more money than the woman so you can provide for your family. You are in charge. You are the provider. And so as evolution, we talk about evolution so much, we have to understand it's real. Things change. Unfortunately, you had a great segue into this question because of the criminalization, the unfair criminalization of Black men are being thrown in jail and prisons. And even if it's a short stint that a Black man gets incarcerated, whether it's jail or prison time, you talk about mental health and wellness. What do you think that does to him morally and mentally? And we don't know, in dehumanizing conditions that they were in before they were incarcerated or subjected to some type of brutality that causes anxiety. So, and I'm taking this in a fashion that I want you to follow because it minimizes and it waters down the strength that a Black man has. And so just like during the war, when the men were off at the war, women had to they had to participate and take care of the family. They had to work. They were on steel mills. They helped build the railroad. Women did this. So when the Black men dissipate and they disappear for whatever reasons, the Black woman starts to step up. And it's okay to the Black man because you're bringing in money, you're keeping it going, you're keeping you're keeping the kids in school, you're dressing them. But just make sure you just hold it down, because when I come back from where I've been, under whatever conditions, I want my space back. But women are getting educated and they're evolving and they're moving along because they want to make sure that they can now, not trying to be in competition with the Black man at all. And I think it's seen that way. We just want to be a part of whatever it takes to make it happen. So as Dr. Howard said, our panelists, our female panelists said, what did you say, Quiana? We're the most educated. We had to be. We a lot of time didn't have any choice. Our men are gone for whatever reasons. And they're not just all gone because they're incarcerated and those things. There are other things and reasons why. And I would like to have that as another conversation, why they're gone. But nonetheless, we entered the workforce. because we have the credentials, right? We have the passion, we have the expertise and experience, because we're showing that we're holding down the house, we're paying the bills, we're taking care of 4 kids. We're buying cars, getting to work, paying gas, and keeping it moving, and looking halfway decent while we're doing it, right? So we get at the table and say, oh my God, what does this Black woman have to say? So historically, many Black men have not accepted the fact that, yes, we have a voice because of our experience. And because of that, some of them don't want us because we do have that expertise and power and clout. So then they decide to, leave the Black home, the Black community, the Black family, and find love elsewhere in the field of daisies, if you will, to keep me from breaking it down to the lowest common denominator. But we're not supposed to be at the table. We're not supposed to be leading the civil rights marches. We're not supposed to be the speakers at big conventions. When you see CNN, MSNBC, and Politics Nation, who is heading up these enterprises, right? We're not supposed to be the voice. And if we say too much in the right thing, we get shut down or shut out. And don't dare accuse somebody of doing something. Oh my gosh, how could you do that? So, we're not supposed to be where we are. And if we do, we're just taking off the Band-Aid, because the Black man is really supposed to be doing all this. But unfortunately, the picture should have been painted and communicated in dialogue more, that we're supposed to grow together. That's what's supposed to happen. That's how it should happen. And then when we have our children, our youth look and all they see, because if you notice, ladies and Brother Barkley, if you notice that when we see these awards with the SB awards and these guys that are getting drafted, football and NBA and da, and they always the first person they talk about who raised them, who gave them the strength, who encouraged them, who kept them there was who? My mom. Very seldom do you see the dads, or the dads are not there. And it's unfortunate. We don't know why they're not there, but along this journey, Black women are supposed to just sit down, bring the coffee to the party, to the meeting, bake the cakes and the potato salad, the deviled eggs, fry the chicken, be a freak in the bedroom, look sexy, clean the house, look good, don't ask for no money, but stay in your place.
Right. And the thing that I've been wondering is, how much of that is, obviously we had a lot of our culture stripped away when we were stolen from our homelands. And, my dad did his, our ancestral tests. We found out that most likely from what's now known as the Democratic Republic of Congo, right? But I don't know much about what civilization was like when we were taken from there. I don't know what the structures were, the social structure. I don't know, right? And so how much of these really strict gender roles and ideas around gender expression and came from the folks who colonized us, right? From the Christians who took us, who brought us back, and then assigned us. I find myself asking, are we just perpetuating the things that we were taught by the folks who enslaved and colonized us? When we buy into these, when you look at the murder of trans women, right, and so much of that discussion tends to revolve around things like gender expression, gender identity, what's right and wrong, right, what's natural and unnatural. How consistent is that with our ancestral lands versus how much of that comes from a more Western Anglo-Saxon way that we were taught? And I don't know. And that whole question of, we should have a discussion at some point about, but there's this misconception if the Black man is gone, it's because he got arrested, and that is a big part of it. But there are all these other things that contribute to hyper toxic masculinity and the lack of feeling of responsibility to the family at times and stuff that also contribute to that too. And I just find myself wondering, where did that come from? Because to your point of, we should be growing together as opposed to this being, it's a competition or hierarchy within the house. We're so far away from that still, it seems like. And you would hope that for an oppressed people, we would at least have that notion of equality and equity internally, right? I know what it feels like to be discriminated against out there. So at home, I'm not going to let those things leak into my systems at home. But that still doesn't seem to be the case, at least in my very limited observation.
I think there's a deeper dive into that, the psychology of it all, but in reference to the transgender female. It's homophobia, the bullying, harassment, or psychological interplays that happen that subject people to it's a very subjective position that it places themselves in, and in your mentality. Because if you're not strong mentally, who you are as a person, whether a man, woman, or whoever you are in your platform and station in life, that can affect you, especially now. And I'm so glad that I think it was Quiana and both of my female panelists brought up the health and wellness piece, because now in the middle of the pandemic, we have men of our households who are really suffering. Every day there's another case of a Black man killing a family or kids or committing suicide and etc. And these features and where our economy is placed in right now is a very dangerous and uncertain position to be in as we matriculate through our daily life, because things are not getting better. I read today that we have over 160,000 Afghanistan refugees that are going to be coming to Phoenix, Arizona. And, and what about our African counterparts who were whipped at the border and, slapped and told to go back? And it took the United States of America almost a week to get everybody out of Kabul, but it took them less than 24 hours to send the Haitians back to Haiti.
And where did they even get those whips in the first place, man? Damn.
And that's why I talk about the mentality of all this, because this is how we're seeing that we're supposed to be chained and whipped and beat. And this is the psychology of it. They didn't give it a second thought to bring out a whip. I was if I had pearls, I would have clutched them. I was in disbelief.
I don't even know where you go about getting something like that. I'm like, damn.
It was
show some decency. Some decency to us, please.
You said it was Texas.
It was Texas.
Yeah, I guess they probably have a surplus store somewhere.
I want to bring a slightly different piece to this, because I think when we talk about the role of gender in the household, we then immediately go to romantic relationships, but there's also something between parents and children. And I always give a shout out to my own father, because I always say he was the very first feminist I ever met. He had 2 daughters, and we were not raised to demur. We were not raised to be silent. We were not raised to not start businesses, to not, shoot for the stars. If I said I wanted to be an astronaut, he was like, "What time is the shuttle leaving?" Like, it was not, we were not raised in that fashion. So I think there's something very significant about the parent relationship or the parental figure relationship when you are talking about young girls, whether it is your mother, your father, your aunts, uncles, whomever, that it really instills in young people that they can do and be whatever they want to be. And they give you the audaciousness to stand in those spaces and own them. And I have had people say, shout out to my father, who said, people say, well, he's got his daughter thinking she can do anything that she wants to. Exactly. And that's exactly the way that I have raised my children, is that they can do anything that they want to. I'm not giving them those types of limitations, whether it be my sons or my daughter. And I think that relationship first might be the piece to maybe a cultural shift that happens when we start communicating to our children that they are more than whatever society has said the little box that they are supposed to occupy. When we challenge that inside our own families with our children.
Right. And, vice versa, as parents raising sons, it's how are you defining the role of what it means to be a father, what it means to be a husband? Are you teaching them that just means by being a provider, that's fiscally being a provider? Or are you teaching them that also means taking care of the house, taking care of the kids, right? How are you defining that to them? Because that's what we learn from, right? Media, we learn from media, we learn from our parents, we learn from our immediate surroundings. And if they're teaching us that that's what that role means, that's most likely what we're going to emulate. Dr. Howard, I saw you unmute yourself, so I want to come over to you.
And I was completely agreeing. I think, and one thing that gives me some hope, as I think of a lot of parents that I know, and some people who are even like younger than me, particularly like a lot of fathers, and just the way that they intentionally are with their children, their daughters in particular, but then also their sons, and making sure, going along with what you said, that, their role is not just in terms of like, yes, I'm paying for this, and the other, but that they are actively, that their kids know that they are actively there, that they are, that they have fun with their kids, that they talk to them, and that they instill in them, that, you can do anything, and that they're like the first supporter. I feel like I know a number of fathers, and just a number of mothers as well, who are intentionally trying to, shift that tide and bring it into a different direction. I think that with that, they make me think there's hope.
Yeah. I've got a little baby girl here. She's 1.5 years, and I hope that as she gets older and watches these, she can look up to women like yourself, as examples and role models, and women like her mom. And also, I try to go about it every day. Like, I want to model to her what is acceptable in a man. If she grows up and she's straight and she looks for a man and stuff, I want her to be able to look at me and say, that's my expectation of what a man does in the house, right? I've got my recipe book, and I organize the chores, and I do a lot of cleaning, and spend as much time with her as possible, and work from home, and hope that I can continue to do all that stuff. And yeah, as generations start to grow into their own families, you hope that there's continuously conscious efforts to do so. I've just got one more question that we probably have time for, and Bernadine, feel free to start heading back. But I like to end these things on an at least fairly positive note. And so my question to you is, when it comes to the fight for progress, are there people in your life or in history, individuals that you look up to as inspirations, that you can model yourself after, or that have just brought a lot to who you are as a person and how you go about that push for progress?
All right, that sounds like me. It's a combination for me, and just falling off the crest of the conversation we just had, I am in the category of no father in the household. And so we are all a manifestation of our childhood. As we grow as adolescents, we become adults, we're a manifestation of those experiences. And so I had to be the one, to be the first to survive, to get the job, make the money, to earn, to be strong, go to school, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, there are many women in history who I love their story. It would be so endless. I have a book called The Women of Hope. I was just looking at this the other day, the Ida B. Wellses, the Sojourner Truths, Harriet Tubmans, the Shirley Chisholms, and Fannie Lou Hamer. All of those women are women that I would role model behind in a heartbeat, because I take a piece out of each one of them that's been a piece of my life. The endurance of my mom, how she raised me in a single family home, raising 3 kids in the inner city of Philadelphia, in tumultuous times, police brutality and drugs, the end of the Vietnam War, Desert Storm, those kind of things. So you live through that, and you learn and you grow through your experiences. And my matriarch of my grandmother, who was strong, who taught me and showed me and educated me along the way. Despite it all, you're going to still learn and be educated. I learned how to play the piano at a young age. I learned how to swim. I learned how to do things on my own under the strength of my mother and my grandmother, strong women in my family, and those of a historical nature. So that it has embedded in me. Fortunately, I can say, and being a part of this panel, Brother Barkley, is that I believe in sharing giving, respecting, and being a part of a unity of what it means to be a part of a womanhood, a sisterhood. And all I can say is that I wish and hope that we can still instill those into our young girls, that, you know, whatever career you choose, that's your business, and whatever, how you do it to make your money, as long as we can show some respect for one another. That's the important message that I would like to live. We're not going to be alike and think alike and walk alike. But at the end of the day, I always say, in the beginning, the middle, and the end of the day, we should just be able to embody that wholesome respect and decency for one another. When I see people, Black women in the streets or in the subway or wherever, why did I say subway? We don't have one here, but that's during my travels. I mean, the obligatory Negro nod, at least. You know, we're not going to see each other ever again as we bustle past wherever we're going, in and out the store, or wherever. But let's be respectful and decent and humane, and respect our differences so that we can grow together to be able to instill some decency and humanity in our womanhood and our sisterhood.
I love it. You preaching, Dr. Hart. I appreciate that. What about you, Quiana? We'll go over to you. Who comes to mind?
Oh, my favorite is Fannie Lou Hamer. She is my absolute favorite. She, stood up in such a big way for all people when she sat at that Democratic convention, and I believe in 1964, and told her story and told her truth and shocked America, so much so that the powers to be tried to shut the station down. That is, to me, just the epitome of why I do the work that I do, is because women like that. Also because her story just reminds me so much of my grandmother and the people that I come from in Mobile, Alabama. My grandmother, who is 86 years old, who is tough as nails and sweet as can be all at the same time, who gives it as much as she can take it and gives a lot, okay? But she also made sure that I knew that I was loved my whole life, but that I knew that I was tough my whole life. And those are things that Fannie Lou Hamer, to me, just represents. She went up against the Goliath of a party that did not want her presence. And that she found her way in there. She kicked that door in and sat on national television and told the stories of so many Black people, all in one moving conversation. Mm-hmm. And ended with, I am sick and tired of being sick and tired. And that is the reason. There's a quote there. Someone says that if you know why you started, you must then remember why you have to continue. And when I hear Fannie Lou Hamer say, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired, that is the reason why I continue, because until the day that I'm not tired, I have to keep going.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that. Thank you so much for sharing that. And ending with you, Dr. Howard, ending with you, who comes to mind?
Well, first, of course, I have to say my mom and my grandmother as well. They both just the major influences on me. Just always encouraging, sweet, strong women. Had to give them. But I would also definitely say I sort of have a trifecta, this writer trifecta, in terms of three women who have really sort of inspired me. And that would be Ida B. Wells and Toni Morrison and Nikki Giovanni. For first with Ida B. Wells, just for the courage to be able, like, basically making that decision that she was going to, go and report about lynchings, and she was going to write and publish this and record it. And in times when, as a woman, people weren't trying to listen to her, as a Black woman in particular, being a Black person, period, doing that, extremely dangerous. And that just, this idea of like, I'm going to tell these stories, like it's important that these get out. That just is always, that's really resonated with me and been very inspiring. I would also definitely, like, in terms of Nikki Giovanni, one of the things that really, I just love how just fearless and like, I'm going to do what I'm going to do, that independence that she has, and tell it like it is. That's always, I love listening to her talk. I love everything that she's written. So that's always been inspiring for me. But then, and lastly, I would say Toni Morrison, because I think in
That's a
particular,
good one.
yeah, she, aside from just a great writer, I think the thing that really made her stand out for me is when I realized that she started when she was, after she, I think she was like 40 or almost 40. Like that was like when her,
Yes.
yeah, when her first book was published, after she had
Mhm.
raising these two sons by herself, like, and she, it's not as though she started, like, I feel like in our society we often glamorize doing everything young, and so I really
Mhm.
just admire women who are like, this is what I'm still going to go after this goal that I have, and it doesn't matter if you think that it's too late or anything such as that. I'm going to go after this. I'm going to do this. And then not only did she do it, but she did it brilliantly and like just amazing. So that's my little trifecta of inspiration, I guess you could say, my role models.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And thank you to all the panelists for sharing that. You know, if you're watching this and you don't have role models, you're looking for new ones, I hope you wrote those names down. Rewind, go look these folks up. You have the internet, so you can find out everything you could possibly want to know. And if you're looking for some folks who are more modern, you've got 3, 4 now wonderful Black women on this screen who you can also look up to too. I admire every last one of you. Thanks so much for spending the night with me. And sharing your intellect and your perspective. I really appreciate it. Bernadine, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Jermaine.
Wow. Well, another amazing discussion. As I was listening to all of you, I think we should have a Black Progress watch group, and I think that all of you should come back like ever so often and check in, and we talk about where we are. Because, I could almost say, well, let's do a part 3.0, and keep it going. So I
I
think
still have
that we
questions
should,
I didn't get to. So
yeah, no, so
Three.
I'm thinking we should,
Three-peat.
yeah, three-peat, right? So I'm thinking that maybe next month we need to come back and let's see where we're going politically. Let's check in what's the progress with COVID in our community, and where are we with higher ed, with education, just all of it. So I honor each and every one of you on the screen. We are because each one of you are, and I appreciate the work that all of you are doing in your respective careers. And I just think it's awesome. I just think we are an awesome people. I'm constantly in awe of who we are as these deep melanated people, the original melanated people. And that alone is very powerful. And when we tap into that and what that really means, and the fact that it's this melanin that actually holds up the universe, it's the same matter. We all carry that. That's some deep bleep bleep. And
Yes, it is.
that's some deep stuff. So that means that if we were to cease to exist, I'll just leave it there. So thank you all for being here, and go in grace.